Some bikes are cool, and some are stupid. It's not, oh, this is fast, stupid. More like, why did they even sell this, stupid? People still bought them, people still ride them, and yes, people still get hurt on them. Today we're showing you 13 bikes that keep proving the same point over and over. You should probably avoid these unless you're insane. First on the list, Kawasaki H2 Mach IV 750. They literally called it the Widowmaker, and people still lined up to buy one because apparently naming your bike after what it does to your family wasn't clear enough. 748cc two-stroke triple making about 70 horses, which doesn't sound that crazy until you remember this is 1972, and the rest of the bike was designed by people who apparently forgot they were installing that engine. The power doesn't ease in or give you a warning, it just shows up like your ex at a party, all at once and usually when you're already committed to something stupid. Front end goes light, the whole thing starts wobbling, and you're having a very serious conversation with yourself about life insurance. The brakes are a front disc and rear drum that were outdated before the bike even shipped, and they're completely useless when you're trying to stop this angry two-stroke doing 120. Basic steel frame, whatever forks they had lying around, and tires with rubber compounds from when grip was just a suggestion. No electronics, no aids, just you and physics having a very educational discussion at high speed. This thing taught more riders about momentum than any textbook, and the lesson usually involved sliding. People still restore these, which is either dedication or denial. Second, Suzuki TL1000S. Suzuki watched Ducati print money with V-twin sport bikes and said, "We want some of that." So they built a 996cc V-twin with fuel injection and an aluminum frame, which all sounds reasonable until someone in engineering had what they probably thought was a genius idea to use a rotary damper instead of a normal shock. The rotary damper saved space and looked cool on paper, but in reality it had the oil capacity of a shot glass and about as much heat tolerance as a snowman in July. You'd start riding hard and the damping would just peace out, the rear end would start doing its own thing, and the bike that felt totally fine 5 minutes ago now has opinions you definitely didn't ask for. The engine makes good torque, which is great, except when your suspension is having an identity crisis, and suddenly the whole chassis is reacting like it just got bad news. The kind of bike where confidence turns into regret, faster than you can process what's happening. So many people gave up and swapped to a regular shock that it became the standard fix, but the bike's reputation was already cooked. Even experienced riders were like, yeah, this isn't a skill issue, the bike's just sketchy, and when the pros don't trust your suspension, that's not great marketing. Coming in third, Honda ST 1300 Pan-European. We're talking about the police spec version specifically because this is what happens when you take a perfectly good touring bike and decide to bolt every piece of equipment known to law enforcement onto it. Honda built a solid 1261cc V4 Sport Tourer that was reliable and comfortable, and police departments looked at it and said, "Great, now let's add radios, light bars, crash bars, boxes, and make it top-heavy as possible." What could go wrong? Well, high-speed weave for starters. Not like a little vibration, we're talking genuine side-to-side instability that shows up when you're doing sustained highway speeds, which is exactly when you don't want your 650-pound bike deciding to practice its dance moves. The civilian versions were mostly fine, but the police bikes with all that weight sitting up high like a bad Jenga tower? Different story. The weave is this fun system level thing where speed, suspension, weight distribution, and aerodynamics all team up to create an oscillation that gets worse the faster you go, which is the opposite of what you want in physics. Plenty of civilian riders never had issues, but when it did happen under real police use at high speed, that's enough to make this list, because surprise mechanical behavior at 100 miles per hour is nobody's idea of a good time. Number 4. Kawasaki H1 Mach III 500. This was the smaller brother of the H2 Widowmaker, and somehow ended up being worse because Kawasaki took a 498cc two-stroke triple that accelerated like it was personally offended by physics and priced it low enough that kids with paper routes could theoretically afford one. Genius business decision, terrible survival rates. The bike made stupid power for a 500, weighed nothing, and went like hell, which sounds great until you realize the brakes were drums front and rear, because apparently stopping wasn't a priority in the design meeting. Riders said once you hit the power band, the front wheel would just leave and traction would disappear, like your paycheck on rent day. The whole bike felt like it was actively trying to murder you, which based on the physics it kind of was. The chassis was flexible, the suspension was whatever they had in the parts bin, and the tires had compounds from when grip was theoretical. The two-stroke power band encouraged you to stay on it, and by the time your brain caught up to what was happening, you were already way too committed. People bought these because fast and cheap is a combination that speaks to poor decision-making, and a lot of them learned expensive lessons about why those two things rarely go together safely. Fifth, Honda Goldwing GL1800. This one's not here because it's fast or handles badly, it's here because someone at Honda forgot to weld the frame properly, and that's the kind of problem that makes lawyers very excited. Honda built this as their flagship luxury tourer, 1832 cubic centimeters flat 6 engine, designed to carry you and all your stuff across continents in total comfort. Then they discovered that certain production runs had frame welds that didn't meet spec, which is a fancy way of saying the welds could crack. And if the welds crack, the lower cross member can separate. And if that separates, the rear suspension can collapse. And if that happens on a 650-pound bike, loaded with luggage and your spouse at 70 miles per hour, you're having a very bad day.
No! God, please, no! No!
This wasn't a quirk or a preference. This was a legitimate structural failure where the frame itself could come apart. No warning, no progressive failure, just critical welds potentially giving out when you least expect it. The irony of Honda's luxury reliability icon having frame integrity issues is not lost on anyone. If you own one from the affected range, you absolutely need to verify the recall work was done, because the frame might fall apart is not something you can just ignore and hope works out. Sixth, Suzuki Hayabusa GSX 1300R. First generation came out in 1999 and immediately became the answer to, how fast do you want to go to jail?
What? What the fuck?
1299cc inline 4 designed specifically to dominate top speed runs, which it absolutely did. The problem is Suzuki sold these to literally anyone with a motorcycle license and decent credit. The bike's stable in a straight line at speeds that would make a fighter pilot nervous, but that kind of capability on public roads where minivans and distracted drivers exist is a terrible idea. You could be doing highway speeds, crack the throttle, and suddenly you're deep in felony territory before your brain catches up to what your right hand just did. No traction control, no rider modes, no electronic nannies, just pure power and whatever judgment you happen to bring that day. What made it dangerous wasn't that it broke, it's that the performance was so accessible that it encouraged confidence at speeds where mistakes don't give you time to think about solutions. People immediately started modifying them to go even faster because apparently stock wasn't sketchy enough. The Hayabusa became a cultural thing, not just track guys buying them, but everyone. And not everyone had the skills to handle speeds, where reaction time essentially doesn't exist anymore. Number 7. Kawasaki Ninja H2R. Your arms are going to be dead after 10 minutes on this thing, and that's if you're in really good shape. The physical demands alone separate this from anything else on the road, except it's not on the road because it's track only and not street legal, which should tell you everything about what Kawasaki was willing to do when they didn't have to follow normal motorcycle regulations. 998cc inline 4 with a supercharger making power levels that are just completely absurd, way beyond what any production street bike puts out, and the whole package is designed for closed courses with professional riders who actually know how to handle something this extreme. Even on a track with runoff areas and safety equipment, this bike is intimidating to experienced riders because the acceleration is so violent that if you're not ready for it, you're immediately in over your head. Braking forces are enormous, cornering loads are insane, and you need perfect reaction times because mistakes occur at speeds where there's no time to think your way out. People who've ridden it talk about how demanding it is just to stay on the bike. You can't relax for even a second, and small throttle or brake inputs create massive reactions because everything is amplified to the absolute limit. Carbon fiber aero winglets generate downforce at speed, which exists purely because the engineers knew this thing would be going fast enough that keeping it planted was a legitimate concern. The margin for error is basically zero. You're operating at the edge of what's physically possible on two wheels. And if you're not at that level, the bike will remind you instantly and painfully. This represents the absolute ceiling of production motorcycle performance, and even in controlled environments with safety measures, it demands respect and skill that most riders don't have. It's not a bike you work up to, it's a bike you need to already be ready for, and even then, it'll test you every single time you ride it. Next up, Yamaha V-Max 1200. Acceleration that the chassis has absolutely no business trying to manage is pretty much the entire story here. 1198cc V4 making massive torque with a really aggressive top-end hit, and everything was tuned for straight-line speed, and looking intimidating, which it definitely accomplished. The problem shows up the second you try to do anything other than go fast in a straight line, because the heavy steel frame, soft suspension, and limited cornering clearance were never designed to handle corners or repeated hard stops from the speeds this thing could reach. Owners loved the power. That wasn't the issue. You'd roll on the throttle and the bike would just launch, but the brakes would start fading if you did multiple hard stops, and the suspension would wallow and flex when you pushed it through turns. Shaft drive, substantial weight, and that sudden torque delivery meant that sloppy throttle control mid-corner would break traction, and by the time you realized what was happening, you were already sliding because the bike's reactions were faster than your ability to correct. What made it worse is that the V-Max became massively popular for modifications. People cranked the power up even higher, which just amplified the mismatch between what the engine could do and what the chassis could safely control. Limited ground clearance meant you'd scrape hard parts way before you ran out of tire, and the suspension just wasn't set up to give you confidence when leaned over. It's an iconic muscle bike and people still love them, but you have to understand what it was built for. Going fast in straight lines and looking aggressive, doing it. If you try to ride it like a sport bike or get ambitious in the corners, it will absolutely punish you for it, because the bike will overwhelm itself faster than you can react. Throttle discipline matters, and knowing where the limits are is critical, because this thing does not have a lot of margin for error once you're outside its comfort zone. Ninth, Suzuki RD500 Gamma. This isn't a bike you just hop on and figure out as you go. It demands that you already know what you're doing before you even start it up. It is basically a Grand Prix race bike with lights and turn signals bolted on, and race bikes are built with zero concern for street riding forgiveness. The 498 cubic centimeter square 4 two-stroke features 4 carbs feeding a compact racing motor that makes serious power, but only in a very narrow RPM window. This is classic two-stroke behavior, meaning you must constantly manage gear selection and engine speed. The power band is peaky and abrupt. You'll be riding along feeling like everything is under control, then the engine comes onto the pipe and suddenly you have way more power than you did a second ago. If you're mid-corner when that happens and you aren't ready for it, things can go bad extremely fast. Its lightweight made it responsive, which sounds good until you realize it amplifies your mistakes just as much as your good inputs. The steering was quick and the whole bike felt nervous and twitchy, especially if you weren't smooth with your controls. Owners talked about how unforgiving it was when you exceeded traction limits. There was no progressive slide or warning, you'd just be gone. 2 strokes are maintenance intensive compared to 4 strokes. They require precise throttle work, and you can't lug them around at low RPM like a regular sport bike. You need to keep them singing in the power band, which means you are always working and thinking 3 moves ahead. The Gamma required constant focus. Lapses in concentration led to mistakes, and mistakes on a light race replica with abrupt power and quick steering escalate incredibly quickly from a minor problem to you being on the ground wondering what happened. Most of these sit in collections now instead of being ridden hard, which honestly makes sense, because this is a bike that punishes casual riding harder than almost anything else from its era. 10th, Yamaha RD500LC. You buy a V4 two-stroke race replica thinking you're getting GP performance for the street, and yeah, you are, but nobody mentioned that. GP performance comes with GP consequences when you screw up. 499cc liquid-cooled V4 two-stroke with 4 carbs. The whole thing was built to give street riders that Grand Prix experience, which sounds amazing until you're actually riding it. High specific output, narrow peaky power band. Just like every other performance two-stroke, abrupt transition when the engine hits its sweet spot, and if you're not expecting it, the bike will teach you about consequences real fast. Lighter than most four-stroke sport bikes from the same time, which made it quick to respond, but also meant there was less weight to stabilize things when they started going wrong. Riders talked about how the power would just suddenly be there. You'd be cruising along, and then boom, you're in the power band, and if your throttle hand wasn't perfect, things got exciting. Precision matters on two-strokes. You can't be lazy with your inputs because the bike won't smooth things out for you. Limited forgiveness when traction breaks loose. The transition between control and not happens really fast. Most of these are collector items now. People keep them nice instead of actually riding them aggressively, which is probably the smart move. Number 11, Marine Turbine Technologies Y2K Turbine Superbike. 300 horsepower from a turbine engine on a motorcycle frame is one of those ideas that makes you wonder if anyone involved actually stopped to think if they should do it instead of just figuring out if they could. This thing used a turbine adapted from aerospace applications, completely different power delivery compared to a piston engine with delayed spool-up characteristics, and throttle response that doesn't work like anything else you've ever ridden. The claimed output was over 300 horses, which is just absurd. Single-speed transmission because turbines don't work like regular motorcycle engines, and the whole package was heavy. Thermal output and exhaust temperatures were way higher than conventional bikes. You couldn't just park this next to regular motorcycles without thinking about where that heat was going. The performance envelope existed so far outside normal motorcycle assumptions that standard riding techniques didn't really apply. Acceleration forces were enormous, and stopping distances were long. Extremely rare, incredibly expensive to buy and maintain, and mostly operated as a collector piece. Small mistakes at the speeds this thing could reach had severe consequences, and the turbine behavior introduced timing challenges that piston engine riders weren't used to dealing with. Zero margin for error. Coming in at number 12, Yamaha TZ750. When professional racers who get paid to go fast say a bike is terrifying, that's not a marketing problem, that's a design philosophy. 750cc two-stroke inline-4 making explosive power in a lightweight race chassis that was built with absolutely zero concern for forgiveness, safety nets, or your continued existence. This was a pure competition machine, no street stuff, no comfort features, just overwhelming violence that required you to be perfect every single second you were on it. The power delivery was narrow and demanding, which means you had to keep it singing in the power band, or it would just stop cooperating. And if you got the throttle wrong at corner exit, all that power would try to break the rear loose, and suddenly you're wrestling a bike that's stronger than you, while also trying to set up for the next turn. The physical and mental workload was intense enough that professionals who raced for a living found it intimidating, and when the guys who do this for money are nervous, that should tell you something. These are rare, historic race machines now, mostly operated in vintage racing by people who know exactly what they're dealing with. The TZ750 is what happens when you decide speed and power matter more than the rider staying attached to the bike. Last but definitely not least, Dodge Tomahawk. Is this even a motorcycle, or is it an 8.3-liter V10 Dodge Viper engine with 4 wheels bolted to it and a seat on top? Because honestly, nobody's really sure, and that ambiguity is part of the problem. Claimed output around 500 horsepower, which is completely insane. 4-wheel configuration with 2 wheels front and 2 wheels rear instead of a normal motorcycle layout, and extremely heavy compared to anything that calls itself a motorcycle. The whole thing was more concept vehicle than functional motorcycle, designed as a technological and visual statement rather than something you'd actually ride. The engine size and weight far exceeded what traditional motorcycle chassis dynamics are designed to manage. Steering geometry and wheel arrangement were experimental and completely unproven at speed, and there were no conventional motorcycle ergonomics or safety systems. Rideability and stability were basically theoretical. The performance figures were never validated through actual real-world riding. It was never engineered around motorcycle safety norms. That extreme mass combined with extreme engine output creates dynamics that are unpredictable at best. extremely rare, mostly displayed in collections rather than ridden. This exists as a shouldn't exist machine. It's on this list because nobody really knows how it would behave if you actually tried to ride it hard. Look, some of you are still gonna buy these bikes because they're cool or cheap or because someone told you not to. That's fine. People make bad decisions all the time and motorcycles are full of them. Just know what you're getting into because these aren't bikes that forgive much and the learning curve is basically a cliff. Stay smart out there, or at least make sure your insurance is paid up. Either way, maybe consider something with ABS next time. If you've made it this far and enjoyed it, well, it's not too late to like and subscribe for more. See you in the next video.